Alert! Alert! Cavern of Souls has been reprinted in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I repeat, Cavern of Souls has been reprinted, which means it's now Pioneer legal. Oh, the sky is falling. Azurius Control is finished. Pioneer is ruined. What was Wizards of the Coast thinking? Wait a minute. Don't I like reprints because now this expensive card is going to be a lot more affordable? And hold up, does a Cavern of Souls reprint into Pioneer mean that Merfolk might actually be playable? I love it! With the release of Lost Caverns of Ixalan, the highly polarizing land, Cavern of Souls, will indeed enter the Pioneer format. If you're a lover of creature strategies like me, then you're likely ecstatic for the boost to your deck's mana base. If you're a control player, womp womp, you've probably rolled your eyes hundreds of times since Cavern of Souls was previewed. Cavern of Souls in Pioneer, but the card that prompted Wizards of the Coast R&D to design Cavern of Souls in the first place, Mana Leak, that's just too good for Pioneer. Times sure have changed, but also, no one cares that control players are upset and complaining. In fact, it's that lack of Mana Leak, or a counterspell of similar power level, that has me uncertain about just how impactful Cavern of Souls will actually be in Pioneer. Make Disappear just doesn't hit the same as Mana Leak, and the various cancel variants? Well, you want me to pay 3 mana just to counter a spell? What am I, made of mana? But if Cavern of Souls will only have a moderate impact on Pioneer, what are the best cards in Lost Caverns of Ixalan for the format? What about the modern format while we're talking? And is there anything coming to Pauper? This video is about the best cards from Lost Caverns of Ixalan for every format. Instead of forcing ourselves to pick 5 to 7 cards for each format, oftentimes trying to make an argument for the viability of cards that probably weren't too viable, but hey, you gotta hit 5 on that top 5 list, we decided, let's just talk about the cards we are certain will be great. If that's just 1 for Modern, fine. If that's just 3 for Pioneer, sure. If that's 10 for Legacy, yeah, okay, there's nothing for Legacy here. Sorry to all 6 of my Legacy homies. Hey, you want to watch Legacy played and good gameplay? Here it is, right there. It was a great episode. 6 Legacy decks, 3 rounds, top players. You didn't watch, but then you yell at me when all we do is Commander gameplay. But that's when you watch, so hey, we're drafting a vintage Power Cube on Monday. Are you gonna watch, or are you gonna share with a friend, or are you just gonna bitch at me when we go back to Commander? Where was I? Oh, yeah, best new cards from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. For this video, I've got picks for Pauper, for Pioneer, and Modern from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, but how many cards do we think really are going to make an impact in those formats? Let's dive right in. Let's begin with one of my favorite formats, Pauper. Bum bum ba da da dum ba ba doo ba doo ba doo 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 doo. Oh, you're still here with me. I didn't hear you come in because of the noise isolation working so well on my Raycon wireless earbuds. What? You mean I can switch modes on these so that I can stay aware of my surroundings? And they have even more features? Gee, I sure wish Raycon would sponsor one of my videos. Oh wow, they have! Would you look at that? You know, Raycon has made a name for themselves by producing premium earbuds and headphones at a fraction of the cost of competitors. Their everyday earbuds have a 32-hour battery life and can sustain 8 hours of continuous playtime. They're also designed to sit flush in your ears, so wherever you like listening to music, whether on the bus or lying down, you can listen in comfort. It should perhaps come as no surprise then that they've earned tens of thousands of 5-star reviews. With their noise isolating mode, Raycons are ideal for cutting out all distractions and helping you focus. It's great for when I'm editing videos or just writing the script to one, as I'm sure you can imagine. They're also great for when I go to the gym or I'm just doing errands. And their awareness mode lets me enjoy my tunes while also staying attuned to my surroundings. And Raycon also has a new line of Raycon Home and Raycon PowerTech products, with products like Magic 180 charging cable and faucet filter. So if you think you've heard enough and are ready to give them a try, you can get Get an early start on holiday sales by shopping Raycon's early Black Friday sale today. Go to buyraycon.com/Tolarian community to get 20 to 50% off site-wide. Wow! Thank you, Raycon, for sponsoring this video. Let's begin with one of my favorite formats, Pauper. The format where all decks are made up entirely of commons, and where many Magic the Gathering players ask the question, what happens when you print a slightly worse, but still extremely very quite good, version of a busted $3 common? That's called redundancy, baby! And redundancy in Magic is worth its weight in gold, cardstock, which is actually worth more than its weight in gold, depending on the card. But that's not here because we're talking Pauper, and I'm talking Fanatical Offering. Fanatical Offering is an instant for one generic and a black mana with an additional cost of sacrificing an artifact or creature. In exchange, you draw 2 cards and create a map token. Map tokens are a new token from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Maps are artifact tokens with a sorcery speed activated ability that reads, pay 1, tap, sacrifice map token. Target creature explores. For those of you who weren't around for our last trip to Ixalan, when a creature explores, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it in your hand. If it's a non-land, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature that's exploring. Then you may choose to put the non-land card into your graveyard or leave it on top of your library. Map tokens are, admittedly, a very cool game piece. It's hard to evaluate just how useful they will turn out to be. You need a creature in play to activate them, and even once you do, the utility they provide is highly contextual on what else is going on. If you're in need of lands, then exploring is great. On the other hand, if you're trying to get the beatdowns going, you'll be pretty disappointed to see a land on top of your deck. The reason I feel Fanatical Offering is so promising for Pauper, though, is not because of the text box on map token. It's because of what's printed on the type line, the word artifact. Fanatical Offering is reminiscent of Deadly Dispute, one of the best new commons for the Pauper format, printed in a standard set in years. If you saw our episode of Shuffle Up and Play, where Andrea Mengucci came to play Pauper, you'll remember what a powerhouse Deadly Dispute was in most of those games. Now, obviously, a map token is usually going to be less useful than a treasure token, but it's still an artifact game object. In, for example, an affinity deck, that artifact token is a big deal. I'd be looking to run Fanatical Offering alongside Deadly Dispute in some kind of black-based affinity shell. So while not as powerful as Deadly Dispute, I do think Fanatical Offering is going to see play in Pauper. Let's move on to new cards for the Pioneer format, where we will start by looking at the color white. White has a long history of removal spells that can get rid of an opponent's creature at the cost of giving your opponent some sort of beneficial effect, whether it's Swords to Plowshares in Alpha, exiling the creature in exchange for some extra life, or the often played Path to Exile, swapping the creature for a land, or more recent iterations of this design like Declaration in Stone and Fateful Absence that trade the creature for a clue token. These efficient but costly spells are a staple in White's removal suite. But with this next card, White has received its best iteration of this type of card in over a decade, and that card is Get Lost. Get Lost is an instant for a generic and a white mana that reads, destroy target creature, planeswalker, or enchantment. Its controller creates 2 map tokens. Wow, Get Lost Faithful Absence. Get Lost is a doozy of a removal spell, capable of dealing with anything from a Sheoldred or a Greasefang to a Karn the Great Creator, or Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, to even a Leyline Binding, Fires of Invention, or Fable of the Mirror Breaker. It answers all of this. The downside is not entirely insignificant, as giving your opponent a pair of map tokens is far from giving them nothing. It's something, but this is a much smaller downside than giving them a clue token, which they can easily convert into a new card. Map tokens, as I touched on earlier, require a creature in play and shouldn't be evaluated as equivalent to a card. It's more like half a card. Sometimes it's a land, and sometimes it's a power and toughness boost strapped to a minor surveil. And again, they need to have a creature in play to use it. You still don't want to fire off Get Lost willy-nilly. This is a card best saved for your opponent's highest highest impact permanents. You also want to be using the card to push your advantage rather than trying to just play catch up with it. If you're firing off a Get Lost to clear a blocker so that you can attack with a wide board, that's great. If you're casting Get Lost off of the mana you untapped with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, that's great too. Or maybe you're destroying a Rest in Peace at the end of turn so you can untap, put a Parhelion into the yard with your Rafine's Informant, then follow it up with a Greasefang. In any of these situations and so many more, it's great. Get Lost is a fantastic tool for white decks in Pioneer, whether you're an aggro, combo, or control deck. It might even be enough to save Azuria's control from the terror inflicted by Cavern of Souls. Speaking of excellent white removal spells for Pioneer, next up we have Dusk Gros Reliquary, a 1-mana white artifact with Ward 2. As an additional cost to cast it, you must sacrifice an artifact or creature. When Dusk Gros Reliquary enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until the reliquary leaves the battlefield. Wow, the hits just keep on coming. Dusk Gros Reliquary is a very strong card, provided you have plenty of sacrifice fodder to allow you to reliably cast it when you need to without hurting too much. Unfortunately, the most natural home for this card at first glance, Rakdos Sacrifice, is not a white deck, and the Pioneer mana isn't good enough to splash a third color just for a removal spell, no matter how good that removal spell is. However, the best home for Dusk Gros Reliquary is a deck that could make a case for being one of the best in Pioneer, the Boros Convoke deck. And if it wasn't the best already, it's certainly going to get a lot better with this new addition. This is a deck that floods the board with lots of small creatures that you then use to power out one of the 2 5-mana 4/4 white Convoke creatures, either Venerated Loxodon or Knight Errant of Eos. This deck plays a ton of sacrifice fodder, both in the plethora of 1/1 tokens it generates and in the artifacts created by creatures like Thraben Inspector and Voldaren Epicure. Dusk Gros Reliquary would be plugging a major hole in the deck too. Convoke is great at going wide, but can often find itself stonewalled by big creatures like Cavalier of Thorns or Atraxa, Grand Unifier. Dusk Gros Reliquary cleanly answers these massive blockers for the low cost of a single white mana and whatever your most expendable game object happens to be. It's not clear which of Dusk Gros Reliquary and Get Lost is the better removal spell. Both are fantastic at what they do and come with just enough downside to prevent them from being utterly broken. I'm giving Dusk Gros Reliquary the higher slot on my list because the deck it best slots into is stronger than the most obvious homes for Get Lost. But make no mistake, both of these cards are very, very good and absolutely going to see play in Pioneer. Before we get to Modern, which has some cards that may overlap with the Pioneer format, there's one more great addition I need to cover. Amalia Benavides Aguirre, a card that's sure to have lovers of creature combo decks, making heart eyes and saying awooga. Amalia is a 2/2 legendary vampire scout for 1 white and 1 black mana. She has Ward, pay 3 life, and a very intriguing triggered ability. Whenever you gain life, Amalia explores. Then, if she has exactly 20 power, destroy all other creatures. 20 power? How could she possibly get that big in a normal game of Pioneer, you might be asking? Well, as it turns out, quite easily. You see, Amalia combines with a standard staple from the original trip to Ixalan, Wild Growth Walker. Wild Growth Walker, for those who don't remember, is a 2-mana 1/3 that reads, whenever you explore, you gain 3 life. And put a +1/+1 counter on Wild Growth Walker. Whenever you gain life, Amalia explores. Whenever you explore, Wild Growth Walker gives you 3 life. Sound the alarm, because it sounds like we have a Splinter Twin situation on our hands. It's actually a very good thing Amalia has the eject button set at 20 power, because otherwise this would be an infinite loop that results in you drawing the game. Since neither Amalia nor Wild Growth Walker are May abilities, that is, you don't get to choose not to explore or gain life, Amalia and the Walker would be caught in an endless dance of exploring and gaining life. And while a never-ending life spent exploring may sound great in theory, in practice, never-ending loops bring games of Magic to a screeching halt. While the other 2 cards we've covered for Pioneer slot into a variety of existing Pioneer archetypes, Amalia will spawn an entirely new Pioneer deck, the Abzan Explore combo. Pair Amalia with Wild Growth Walker, a few other powerful Explore creatures from this set, and/or Ixalan's past, toss in some Enter the Battlefield-based life gain, and top it all off with a playset of collected companies these, and you've got yourself an excellent, low-to-the-ground creature combo deck with a potent mid-range backup plan and plenty of natural card selection to help you find your pieces. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? So that's it for Pioneer, but is it really? You see, now I want to talk about the best new cards for Modern, but there's some overlap between the two formats because, of course, everything that's legal for Pioneer is also legal for Modern. But keep in mind that good in Modern may not mean good in Pioneer. There are differences between the formats. Decks, meta, heck, the fact that fetch lands are legal. And so while I am talking about these Modern picks, I will also talk about their potential relevance in Pioneer. But remember, this next section is focusing on Modern with a few words towards the viability of these cards in Pioneer. Let's take a look. First up on our Modern list is a removal spell so good, it's almost hard to believe it's real. Molten Collapse, a modal sorcery for a red and a black mana. You may choose one, either destroy target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. Or if you've descended this turn, that is, if a permanent hit your graveyard from anywhere this turn, you may choose to do both. Both! In Pioneer, Dreadbore was already a good card. This card is Dreadbore or a mini Abrupt Decay, and sometimes it's even better than either. Now, while I do think this card will see Pioneer play, the reason it's on our Modern list is because descending isn't the easiest thing to do in Pioneer, as the format doesn't have fetch lands, which is what makes Descend easier to achieve in Modern. But there's still ways to achieve this in Pioneer, like discarding a land to your second chapter of Fable of the Mirror Breaker, or of course in Rakdos Sacrifice, sacrificing your Cauldron Familiar to Witch's Oven, or an Unlucky Witness to Deadly Dispute. So this card does have the possibility to go off in Pioneer. But Molten Collapse is really going to pop off in Modern. Why? Well, like I said, descending is a lot easier to do in a format with fetch lands. So when you need to put a permanent in the graveyard, you just need to crack a Bloodstained Mire or the like. What's more, the best deck in Modern right now is, let me look it up, oh yeah, Rakdos Scam. This marks 3 sets in a row now where Rakdos Scam received a fantastic upgrade. First, Orcish Bowmasters in Lord of the Rings, then Not Dead After All in Wilds of Eldraine, and now Molten Collapse. Let's look at all the problematic 1 mana value or less non-creature, non-land cards that Molten Collapse can hit. Hardened Scales, Sigarda's Aid, Colossus Hammer, Amulet of Vigor, the Ozolith, Grafdigger's Cage, Shadow Spear, Stone of Eric, the list goes on and on. These are all permanents that were massive headaches for the Scam deck. Previously, the deck had been playing the clunky removal spell Hidesugu Consumes All in order to get rid of these permanents. But now, Molten Collapse is a clean, main deckable answer to all of them. And if you clear the very low bar of Descending the turn you cast it, you can also clean up a Pure Still Paladin, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, or Arcbound Ravager while you're at it. And as early as turn 2. Ugh, as if Rakdos decks need the help. Alright, so what's our number 1 pick for Modern, and does it also have relevance in the Pioneer format? Our number 1 card for Modern, which also will see some play in Pioneer, is Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf is a Lurgoyf for 1 and a green mana whose power is equal to, no, wait a minute. Tarmogoyf isn't all that strong in Modern anymore. That's why it's selling for under $10. Oh my goodness. Well, our number 1 pick is actually better than Tarmogoyf. But no, it's not a Modern Horizons card. It's Souls of the Lost. Souls of the Lost is a spirit creature for 1 generic and a black mana. In order to cast Souls of the Lost, you must either discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Souls of the Lost's power is equal to the number of permanents in your graveyard, while its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. Sound familiar? This is very similar templating to actual Tarmogoyf. But instead of counting card types in all graveyards, Souls of the Lost only counts your own graveyard and counts total number of permanents. That means it's more vulnerable to one-sided graveyard hate, like Leyline of the Void, Unlicensed Hearse, or Nihil Spellbomb. But on the flip side, that also means it can grow very quickly. In Modern, fetch land lands fuel this card's stat line. Mishra's Bauble fuels it. Heck, even Street Wraith fuels it. It is very, very easy to imagine this card as a 2-mana 5/6 as early as turn 2. Use 2 fetch lands to cast it, discard a permanent for the additional cost, then crack a Mishra's Bauble and cycle a Street Wraith. Boom! 5 power, 6 toughness, turn 2. Souls of the Lost also pairs very well with Death's Shadow, as both cards reward you for putting fetch lands and Street Wraiths in your deck. In a sense, Souls of the Lost is the antithesis to another big modern creature, Murktide Regent. Murktide Regent rewards you for putting instants and sorceries in your yard to delve away, while Souls of the Lost wants to hoard as many permanents in your graveyard as possible. Unlike Murktide though, Souls of the Lost is very easy to cast early and start hitting as early as turn 3. And while Modern is certainly this card's most natural home, I have a very strong feeling it's also going to find somewhere to live in Pioneer. I can see it in the Greasefang deck as a standalone threat to overload your opponent's removal. And as a 2-mana discard outlet, it can serve a similar role to Rafine's Informant in regards to getting vehicles into your graveyard. Or, you know, just cast Grisly Salvage with Souls of the Lost in play to give your creature potentially as much as +4/+4 at instant speed, depending on how many permanents you mill. Souls of the Lost is a very exciting card. Its drawback is certainly meaningful, but ultimately discarding a card or sacrificing your most expendable permanent is a small price to pay for a creature that can get as large as Souls of the Lost can become. So there you have it, the best new cards from Lost Caverns of Ixalan for every relevant format, except Commander. Commander's getting its own dedicated video. There's a lot to say about Commander, and we didn't talk about Standard because are you playing Standard in paper? Sorry again to Legacy. Watch the Legacy gameplay, or tune in on Monday for drafting a Power Vintage Cube. Like, don't complain to me about how it's all Commander and then you only watch the Commanders, what I'm saying. But let me know in the comments below. Do you think there are more cool cards for the formats we discussed? Pauper, Pioneer, Modern. Agree or disagree with our picks? Leave a comment. And hey, thanks once again to Raycon wireless earbuds for sponsoring this video. You know, if you are ready to give affordable wireless earbuds a try, then check out Raycon. And right now, you can get an early start on holiday sales just by shopping Raycon's early Black Friday sale today. So go to buyraycon.com/Tolarian community to get 20 to 50% off site-wide. Wow, thank you Raycon for sponsoring this video.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Today, we are drafting not just a vintage cube, but a paper vintage cube. Not just a paper vintage cube, but a powered paper vintage cube.
That's right, a collection of some of the most powerful cards in Magic's history. I love it. It's like my own personal museum.
Current Magic has got nothing on Dark Ritual and the Hypnotic Spectre.
Yeah, I was born a few years after it.
I thought you were gonna say you were born from a Dark Ritual.
Yeah, she was. Just look very closely at these 2 cards. Why is this banned and not this?
Tap 1, I'm gonna Elvish Piper for a Massacre Worm.
Blighted Colossus, when it hits the graveyard, reveal it and I shuffle it into the library. So at least I get a shuffle.
Up and play.
Right. I'm gonna up and play. Don't make me up and play. Yeah. Don't make me up and play.